Jumbo Joe. Admittedly, this piece of news isn't as big of a deal as it may seem at first, but at the same time, it sure is something interesting to talk about. So let's go over Joe Thornton and just what Elliotte Friedman was talking about earlier on the Saturday headlines on Sportsnet's broadcast. It was the last headline of the day, and it noted how Elliotte Friedman believes the idea of Joe Thornton going to Switzerland to start off the 2020-2021 season is not something that you should immediately scoff away at. This is mostly because Joe Thornton is apparently currently in Switzerland. According to Elliotte Friedman, he goes there every August. And with the NHL giving its players the opportunity to sign European contracts with NHL out clauses available, it does open the door for Thornton to start his season off there. It's just kind of different here, because Joe Thornton is currently, or at least, well, he's going to be a UFA, and he doesn't have a contract with the Sharks set in place for next year. Now, we all know Joe Thornton's story. Jumbo Joe, drafted first overall a long time ago, 1997. He's a big 6'4", 220-pound, 41-year-old passing, play-making machine. After being acquired by the San Jose Sharks, he was a beast. And he's been a star in this league for a very long time, arguably one of the best passers to ever play the game. He's at over 1,000 assists, and he is a UFA to be. It's just, playing in Switzerland is not something that Joe Thornton is absolutely foreign to. In 2004-2005, in that year's NHL lockout, Joe Thornton went to HC Davos in the Swiss NLA, and he led the entire league in points that year. He played on the top line alongside of NHL players Rick Nash and Nick Hagman. And they were first, second, and third in points in the entire league in its entirety, and then they won the Spengler Cup that summer too. So there certainly is a lot of storied history between Joe Thornton and this individual Davos team. In fact, according to Wikipedia, both Rick Nash and Thornton have subsequently kept in contact with the team and their manager Arnaud De Courteau, and Thornton returns to train with them for up to a month each summer. In fact, during that 2004-2005 lockout season in Switzerland, Joe Thornton met his wife. So that's kind of why they always go back to Switzerland every summer, and it's kind of why he ends up training with the team. During the 2012-2013 lockout, the shortened season that year, he actually went back to Davos too, played 33 games and had 36 points. He was over a point per game. Then when the NHL came back, he came back to San Jose, had 40 points in 48 games, and then they went into the playoffs. So there certainly is a lot of history here between Thornton and the actual country and hockey culture itself that is within Switzerland. So, furthermore, we have ourselves Kevin Kurse on Twitter, who covers San Jose Sharks in The Athletic. He talked about the Hockey Night in Canada Elliotte Friedman report about Joe Thornton and his Switzerland presence, and Kurse says it's not that Elliotte needs confirming, but his understanding is that it's true. Joe Thornton is in Switzerland right now with family, and he plans to start skating soon, although there are no concrete plans yet. So when I look at this, I say to myself, Joe Thornton actually has quite a few options here. If he wants to go the NHL route where he eventually comes back to an NHL team and finishes off the season with the opportunity to maybe win a Stanley Cup or so, then he goes to Switzerland, he dominates, he gets a step back up in his game, he gives the hockey club Davos some good things to cheer about, and then he comes back to the NHL once November comes around. He signs a contract with an NHL team, and he makes his way back. Or, and this is probably the more ambitious of the two options, maybe he just completely stays in Switzerland and doesn't decide to come back. Surely you could make the argument that there's less of an incentive to do that, because if you're good enough to play in the NHL, why not just play in the NHL? But with all the uncertainties of the safety of the world going forward, as well as the fact that we don't really know if the NHL is going to be able to start back in November, and with the whole uncertainties with fans and all that stuff, whether or not they're going to be in the arenas too, there certainly could be an incentive for a 41-year-old Joe Thornton who has a wife and kids to just sit down and say, you know, let's just stay here in Switzerland for a little bit longer. And again, that's just me completely spitballing. This is my own personal interpretation of the scenario, but the implications certainly can be there. Just because Joe Thornton would be available in the free agent market does not mean that a team would necessarily be willing to shell out big bucks for him. He's coming off of a one-year, $2 million deal, and he recently had 31 points in 70 games played, which is literally his worst producing season in his entire career since his rookie year in 1997-98. So there's certainly a lot to be looking at here when you take a look at the body of work that Joe Thornton has had, and the bottom line of that is, it's so deep, it's so enriched with NHL success, but the guy's 41 now. And his production has declined, so is there really as strong of an incentive for an NHL team to go out there and get this player, even for a really cheap deal? We made a video about this back in February, but Joe Thornton actually wanted to get traded back at the trade deadline, because he wanted to go to a Stanley Cup contending team and actually compete. But with the San Jose Sharks, they weren't able to find a suitor for him because nobody technically wanted him. That's why he remained on the Sharks after the trade deadline, and he vented his frustrations to the media. And that was actually a really interesting story, because a few weeks beforehand, or a few days or something like that, I remember before that, Joe Thornton actually apparently had a short list of NHL teams that, according to some sources, he would probably want to go to. Colorado, Boston, Dallas, Pittsburgh, and Tampa Bay. But apparently none of them wanted him, and so after the trade deadline, he told The Athletic, "I've been dreaming about the Stanley Cup ever since I can remember, and it just didn't come to fruition for whatever reason. I wanted to get something back for the Sharks to help them continue their process with the young guys, but it just didn't work out." Then, eventually they asked him, what is it like still being a Shark, and do you kind of have any regrets of not being traded? And he said, "It would have been nice to at least have a chance. I wanted a shot, Believe it or not, I've been hunting this thing down for 22 years, so I wanted another shot at it. I wanted to get something for the Sharks in return, but it just didn't work out. Back to the grind, and that's how it is." And because he's so adamant on that grind, I would honestly assume him to probably sign a contract with a Swiss team, probably Hockey Club Davos, and start out the year in Switzerland. It's just a fact on whether or not the NHL teams, like the good ones that he mentioned earlier, Colorado, Tampa, Dallas, etc., would be interested in bringing him back, even though at that time it would be maybe like 9 months removed from a Joe Thornton version that they didn't want to trade for back then at the deadline. And honestly, if there's no contender that would be willing to sign him, even for cheap, I could understand the perspective of just saying, you know what? There's no chance. Let's just stay here in Switzerland, play out the rest of the year, see how good we can do, and we'll call it a day there. So obviously there's a lot of room for things to develop, but Joe Thornton is certainly in a position where his certainty and his guarantee of playing in the NHL is not as strong now than it was a calendar year ago. It's kind of unfortunate, really. You take a look at other guys who have been in the same spot as Thornton, even Patrick Marleau, the guy got traded to Pittsburgh, and now he ended up losing in Game 1 against the Habs. Haha, yes, that did happen. But, Thornton is certainly a guy who, even when we made the video about it before, I was talking about how valuable it could be to have a veteran leader guy like Thornton who's been in the game for 20 plus years and who has so much experience to pass on to the young guys. Imagine Joe Thornton mentoring a guy in Colorado like Alex Newhook. Or he goes over to Dallas and he gives Ty Dellandrea some tips. Or in the Boston Bruins system a year from now, he's able to give pointers to John Beecher, another big center that the Boston Bruins have in their pipeline. So there certainly is a lot of opportunities here to pass on his expertise to those who are carrying the game forward into the future. But that is very contingent on whether or not NHL teams would actually want to go for him. So that kind of wraps up our video here on Joe Thornton. There's a lot of questions about this, whether or not he'll start his season off in Switzerland, whether he'll be good enough to come back to the NHL, whether NHL teams would want to get him back after we already noted in February how they didn't want him, and all we can do is wait. Although I do know that for San Jose Sharks fans, there's not really much that can happen to your team to make it actually worse. I mean, getting rid of Thornton would probably do something. I don't really know how good or bad it would be, because you could probably get a substitution for him that would not necessarily be too far removed from what Thornton is capable nowadays in the NHL. But let me know what you think in the comments below about this whole idea. Do you think this is best for Thornton? Do you think there's a move here that's waiting to happen that could be very beneficial for him, that would allow him to hopefully get his hands on a Stanley Cup Finals matchup or whatever? Talk to me in the comments below what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. So that's Horse 99. and bye.